The morning sun rose over New Haven like it had for the past 50 years. Jake Miller stood on his office balcony and watched the golden light spread across the farming fields. The crops were growing well this season. Green plants stretched as far as he could see, swaying gently in the warm breeze. Jake was the colony administrator for New Haven. It was his job to make sure everything ran smoothly for the 50,000 people who called this planet home. Most days, that meant dealing with small problems like broken water pipes or disagreements between neighbors. He liked it that way. Down in the main street, children were walking to school with their bags on their backs. Shop owners were opening their stores for another day of business. The bakery was already filling the air with the smell of fresh bread. Everything was normal and peaceful. Lisa Parker checked the security monitors in her office. She was the head of security for the colony, but there was not much to secure. The biggest crime they had seen in months was someone stealing apples from a neighbor's tree. The defensive systems around the colony were basic. They had shields that could stop small meteors and a few old weapons that had never been fired. Lisa often wondered if they needed any defenses at all. The humans had been living on New Haven for 3 generations without any real trouble. The planet was far from the main trade routes and had nothing valuable except good farming soil. Who would want to attack a bunch of farmers? Dr. Amanda Foster was already busy at the medical center. She treated everything from broken bones to common colds. The biggest emergency she had handled recently was when old Mr. Johnson fell off his roof while fixing tiles. The medical center was small but had everything needed to keep the colonists healthy. Amanda had moved to New Haven 5 years ago from Earth. She liked the quiet life and the way everyone knew each other. Back on Earth, she had worked in huge hospitals with thousands of patients. Here, she knew every family and watched their children grow up. Ben Clark was setting up his classroom for another day of teaching. He taught history to the older children and loved telling them stories about Earth and the early days of space. Travel. His students often asked him about wars and battles from the old days. Ben would explain that humans had learned to solve problems with words instead of weapons. The children found it hard to believe that people once fought big wars with millions of soldiers. To them, conflict meant arguments about who got to play with which toys. Ben was proud that they lived in such peaceful times. Across the galaxy, things were very different. The Zephyrian Empire was always looking for new worlds to conquer. The Zephyrians were tall aliens with hard, crystal-like skin that could deflect most weapons. They were proud warriors who believed strength was the most important thing in the universe. Ambassador Kethvar stood before the Zephyrian High Council in their crystal palace. His voice echoed through the chamber as he spoke about the human colonies. "These humans are weak," he said with contempt. "They spend their time growing plants and trading goods. They have no warriors, no powerful weapons, no fighting spirit." The other council members nodded in agreement. They had been watching human settlements for months. The humans seemed more interested in building schools than military bases. There, ships carried farming equipment instead of weapons. Their communications talked about harvest festivals and birthday parties, not battle plans. Commander Vex Thul was planning the attack on New Haven from his flagship. He had studied the colony's defenses and found them laughable. A few old shield generators and some outdated weapons that looked like museum pieces. His fleet could destroy the entire settlement in less than an hour. "The humans will surrender quickly," Vex Thul told his officers. "Once they see our power, the other colonies will give up without a fight. We will have a dozen new worlds within a month." His officers agreed enthusiastically. They had been looking for an easy victory to add to their military records. Fighting the humans would be like taking territory from children. Back on New Haven, Jake Miller was reading the daily reports. Crop yields were up. The weather was good, and the new water treatment plant was working perfectly. The only unusual thing was a message from the Space Traffic Control Center. They had detected some ships at the edge of the system, but the ships had not responded to communication attempts. Jake was not worried. Ships passed through their system regularly on the way to other destinations. Most of the time, they were traders or explorers who kept to themselves. The colony had received visits from several alien species over the years, and all had been peaceful. Lisa Parker saw the same report and made a note to keep monitoring the unknown ships. It was probably nothing, but it was her job to be careful. She increased the range on their sensors and asked the communication center to keep trying to contact the visitors. The evening came peacefully to New Haven. Families gathered for dinner, children played in the parks, and the adults talked about their day's work. The community center was hosting a dance that weekend, and everyone was looking forward to it. Jake Miller went home to his wife Mary and their 2 children. They lived in a simple house with a garden where Mary grew flowers and vegetables. Their daughter Kate was 8 years old and wanted to be a teacher like Mr. Clark. Their son Tom was 6 and dreamed of flying spaceships. As Jake tucked his children into bed, Kate asked him about the stars. "Daddy, are there nice people living on other planets like us?" Jake smiled and kissed her forehead. "I hope so, sweetheart. The universe is big enough for everyone to live in peace." Neither Jake nor anyone else on New Haven knew that death was coming for them. The Zephyrian fleet was moving closer through the darkness of space, preparing to turn their peaceful world into ash and memory. The attack came without warning at dawn. Jake Miller was drinking his morning coffee when the sky lit up with bright flashes. At first, he thought it might be a meteor shower, but the lights were too regular and too bright. Lisa Parker was already at her security station when the alarm started screaming. Her screens showed massive ships appearing in orbit around New Haven. The ships were unlike anything in her database. They were dark and covered with spikes that gleamed like black crystal. All civilians report to emergency shelters immediately. Lisa broadcast over the colony's communication system. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking as she activated the defensive shields. The energy barriers flickered to life around the main settlement areas. The first plasma blast hit the North Residential District. The explosion was so bright that people could see it from 50 miles away. Houses that had stood for decades were turned into burning rubble in seconds. The blast wave shattered windows across half the colony. Jake ran toward the command center while explosions lit up the sky behind him. He could hear children crying and adults shouting as people poured out of their homes. The emergency sirens were so loud that he had to shout into his communicator. "This is Administrator Miller." He called to all department heads. "Begin immediate evacuation procedures. Get the children to the transport ships first." Dr. Amanda Foster was already treating injured people at the medical center when the building shook from a nearby explosion. She had trained for emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for this. People were coming in with burns and cuts, and more kept arriving every minute. "We need to move the patients to the underground levels," she told her nurses. The medical center had been built with a reinforced basement in case of natural disasters. Now it was the only safe place they had. Ben Clark was in his classroom when the attack started. 25 children looked at him with frightened eyes as the wall shook from explosions. He had to make a decision quickly. "Everyone stay calm," he told his students. "We're going to play a game where we have to be very quiet and stay together." He led the children toward the school's basement shelter. It was designed to protect against storms, not military weapons, but it was better than staying in the classroom. Halfway down the stairs, another explosion hit the school's main building. The ceiling collapsed on top of them. Ben pushed 3 children into the shelter before the concrete crushed him. His last thought was that he hoped his students would remember the stories he had told them about heroes. Commander Vexthul watched the attack from his flagship with satisfaction. The human shields had lasted only minutes against his plasma cannons. The colony's weapons had not even fired back. This was going exactly as he had planned. Target there. Schools and hospitals next, he ordered his weapons officer. Break their spirit quickly so they surrender faster. The Zephyrian strategy was simple. Destroy the places humans cared about most, and they would give up without a real fight. It had worked on dozens of other worlds. Jake reached the command center just as another wave of bombs hit the colony. Half of his staff was missing, probably trying to help their own families escape. He tried to contact the approaching transport ships. Emergency evacuation in progress. He broadcast on all frequencies. We have 50,000 civilians who need immediate pickup. The first transport ship that tried to land was destroyed by plasma fire before it could touch the ground. The pilot had been trying to reach the elementary school, where hundreds of children were trapped. Jake watched in horror as the ship broke apart in the sky. Lisa Parker was coordinating the shield defenses when her equipment started failing. The generators were overloading from the constant bombardment. She had maybe 10 minutes before the shields collapsed completely. "We need to get more people to the underground shelters," she told Jake over the communicator. "The shields won't hold much longer." But the shelters were filling up quickly. New Haven had been built as a peaceful farming community, not a fortress. The emergency facilities could only hold a few thousand people at most. Dr. Foster was operating on an injured child when the medical center took a direct hit. The upper floors collapsed, trapping patients and staff in the basement. She could hear people calling for help from under the rubble, but there was no way to reach them. The air was full of smoke and dust. The backup power was failing, and she was running out of medical supplies. She kept working by the light of emergency lamps, trying to save whoever she could. Some families managed to reach the transport ships that were still trying to land outside the colony. Parents carried their children through smoke and falling debris toward the landing areas. Many did not make it. Mary Miller was running toward a transport ship with her 2 children when a piece of burning wreckage fell from the sky. She pushed Kate and Tom toward the ship and told them to keep running. The wreckage crushed her before she could follow them. Jake did not know his wife was dead. He was still in the command center, trying to coordinate the evacuation. More than half the colony was destroyed, and thousands of people were missing. The transport ships that were getting through could only take a few hundred people at a time. After 6 hours, the bombing stopped. Commander Vexthul sent a message to the burning colony and to all human settlements within 50 light years. "I am Commander Vexthul of the Zephyrian Empire." His voice boomed from the speakers. "New Haven now belongs to us. Any human colonies that do not surrender immediately will face the same fate." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of burning buildings and people crying for their lost families. 35,000 people were dead, including 8,000 children. The green farming fields were black with ash and debris. Jake Miller stood in the ruins of his office and looked out at what had been his peaceful colony. His home was gone, his people were scattered or dead, and he had no idea if his children had survived. But the attack on New Haven had done something the Zephyrians had not expected. News of the massacre was already spreading to every human world. Automated distress beacons were carrying the story across the galaxy. The sleeping dragons were about to wake up, and they would be very angry. The news of New Haven reached Earth 3 days after the attack. President Ellen Hayes was in a meeting when her aide burst into the room with the emergency report. She read the message twice before she could believe what she was seeing. 35,000 civilians dead. 8,000 children murdered. An entire peaceful colony destroyed by aliens who wanted to expand their territory. The images from the survivorship showed burning cities and crying families holding pictures of their lost loved ones. Ellen Hayes had been president for 6 years. She had dealt with trade disputes, natural disasters, and political problems. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. She stood up from her desk and walked to the window that looked out over the capital city. "Call an emergency session of the Colonial Council," she told her aide. "And get me Admiral Carter immediately." Fleet Admiral Roy Carter was 70 years old and had been retired for 5 years. He lived in a small house by the ocean, where he spent his days reading military history and fishing. When the call came from the president, he was not surprised. He had been expecting something like this for years. Carter had spent 40 years in the Colonial Defense Force. He had fought pirates, stopped smugglers, and kept peace along the frontier. But he had always known that someday, humans would meet aliens who were not interested in peace. "Mr. President," Carter said when he arrived at the emergency meeting, "I've been warning about this possibility for 20 years. Our colonies are spread across hundreds of worlds with almost no military protection." The Colonial Council was made up of representatives from 50 human worlds. Many of them had never seen real war. They were used to solving problems with negotiations and trade agreements. The massacre at New Haven had shaken them badly. "What do you recommend, Admiral?" asked Councilman Greg Murphy from the mining world of Kepler Station. Carter pulled up a holographic map of human space. Red dots marked the locations of known Zephyrian forces. There were more of them than anyone had realized. "We mobilize everything," Carter said simply. "Every ship, every factory, every person who can hold a weapon. The Zephyrians think we're weak farmers and traders. They're about to learn they made a very big mistake." The president signed the Emergency War Powers Act that same day. For the first time in 200 years, the human government activated total war mobilization protocols, laws that had been written after the ancient Earth. Wars but never used were suddenly put into action. Captain Steve Walsh was commanding a cargo ship called the Morning Star when he received new orders. "Report to Luna shipyards immediately for military conversion and crew reassignment." Steve had served in the Colonial Defense Force years ago, but he thought those days were behind him. The Luna shipyards were the biggest ship construction facility in human space. They normally built cargo vessels, passenger liners, and research ships. But when Steve arrived, he saw something very different. Hundreds of civilian ships were being fitted with armor plating and weapons. The cargo ship he had been commanding was being turned into a warship. Military engineers were installing plasma cannons, missile launchers, and defensive systems. "How long will this take?" Steve asked the lead engineer. 2 weeks for basic conversion," Tracy Adams replied. She was working 18-hour shifts to retrofit the civilian fleet. "But we're not just converting old ships. We're building new ones based on military designs that have been classified for decades." Tracy had been an engineer at Luna shipyards for 10 years. She thought she knew everything about human shipbuilding technology. But when the military opened their secret files, she discovered that humans had been quietly developing weapons and ship designs that were far more advanced than anything the public knew about. The industrial worlds shifted to wartime production overnight. Factories that made farming equipment started making weapons. Plants that built civilian electronics began producing military sensors and communication systems. The entire human economy was being transformed for war. On Mars, the massive industrial complexes were working around the clock. Factory manager Bill Chun had never seen anything like it. Workers were volunteering for extra shifts without being asked. Production rates were breaking records every day. "It's like the whole human race just woke up," Bill told his wife during one of his rare breaks at home. "People are working like their lives depend on it, and their lives did depend on it." News kept coming in about more Zephyrian attacks. 2. More human colonies had been destroyed. The aliens were moving deeper into human space, destroying everything in their path. But the Zephyrians were starting to notice changes. Their scouts reported increased human ship activity. Cargo vessels were traveling in armed groups instead of alone. New ships with unknown designs were appearing on their sensors. Commander Vextol was on his flagship when he received a report about a human convoy that had fought back against a Zephyrian patrol. Instead of running away, the human ships had attacked with coordinated tactics and heavy weapons. The humans are organizing some kind of resistance, his intelligence officer reported. But it's probably just a few military ships they had hidden somewhere. Vextol was not worried yet. Even if the humans had some warships, the Zephyrian Empire had been fighting wars for thousands of years. These soft colonists could not possibly match experienced warriors. Admiral Carter was setting up his command center on Luna Station. The facility had been expanded 3 times in the past month to handle all the new military activity. Officers who had been retired were returning to duty. New recruits were being trained as fast as possible. But Carter was not just building a military force. He was organizing something much larger. Supply chains that stretched across dozens of star systems. Intelligence networks that were gathering information about Zephyrian movements. Industrial coordination that turned the entire human civilization into a war machine. The Zephyrians think they're fighting farmers, Carter told his staff during a planning meeting. They don't understand what they've awakened. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Price had been studying the Zephyrian attack patterns. The aliens were good individual fighters, but they were not prepared for the kind of systematic warfare that humans were capable of. They fight for glory and honor, Price explained to the other officers. We fight to protect our families. Those are very different kinds of motivation. The first human counterattack fleet was almost ready. Captain Walsh had been given command of a fast attack squadron. His converted cargo ship was now a heavily armed cruiser called the Retribution. The name had been chosen by the crew. Tracy Adams had finished the military conversion ahead of schedule. The ship looked nothing like the peaceful cargo vessel it had been a month ago. It was covered with armor and bristling with weapons that had never been seen in civilian space. The Zephyrians wanted to see what humans are really like, Tracy told Steve as she handed over the ship's new specifications. I think they're going to get their wish. The war was about to begin in earnest. The sleeping dragons were waking up, and they were hungry for revenge. The Zephyrian Empire had made the biggest mistake in their long history. They had attacked human children, and now they were going to learn why that was a very bad idea. Admiral Carter looked at the fleet reports on his desk. In just 2 months, humanity had built the largest military force in their history. Ships, weapons, and soldiers were being produced faster than anyone thought possible. The dragons were awake, and they were ready to burn the galaxy. The first human attack came 6 months after New Haven burned. Captain Steve Walsh led his squadron of 12 ships toward the Zephyrian border world of Keth Prime. The planet had been taken from another alien species 50 years ago and turned into a military base. Steve's ship, the Retribution, moved through space with 11 other converted vessels. They looked like normal cargo ships from a distance, but up close, the heavy armor and weapon systems were clearly visible. The Zephyrians had no idea what was coming. All ships, this is Captain Walsh, he broadcast to his squadron. Remember, we hit fast and hard. No mercy for anyone who kills children. The Zephyrian base commander, Thekvar, was drinking ceremonial wine when his sensors detected the approaching human ships. He was not worried. 12 cargo vessels against a fortified military world seemed like a joke. Send out 2 patrol ships to destroy them. Dekvar ordered his weapons officer. "Make it quick so we can get back to our celebration." The two Zephyrian patrol ships moved toward the human squadron with confidence. They had crystal armor that could deflect most weapons and plasma cannons that could destroy most ships with a single shot. They had never lost a fight against inferior opponents. Steve watched the enemy ships approach on his screen. The Zephyrians were moving in a straight line, probably expecting the humans to run away. They were about to get a very unpleasant surprise. "All ships, execute attack pattern Delta," Steve commanded. The human ships suddenly split into 3 groups and began moving in different directions. The Zephyrians found themselves surrounded. Before they realized what was happening, the humans were not running away. They were hunting. The first Zephyrian ship was destroyed in seconds. Plasma bolts from 4 different human ships hit it at the same time, overloading its shields and cracking its crystal armor. The second ship tried to escape, but was caught by a missile barrage from the Retribution. Dekvar stared at his screens in shock. 2 of his best ships had been destroyed in less than a minute. The humans were using tactics he had never seen. Before, they were not fighting like honorable warriors. They were fighting like predators. "Launch all fighters," he ordered frantically. "Activate planetary defenses." A human squadron moved toward the planet like a pack of wolves. They did not try to fight the Zephyrian fighters in individual combat. Instead, they used coordinated attacks and electronic warfare to confuse and destroy their enemies. Lieutenant Commander Pete Morris was leading the electronic warfare systems on the Retribution. He had been a computer programmer before the war, but now he was using his skills to jam Zephyrian communications and disrupt their weapon systems. "Their command signals are getting weaker," Pete reported to Captain Walsh. "I can probably shut down their orbital defenses completely." "Do it," Steve replied. "Then we take the planet." The orbital defense platforms around Keth Prime went silent one by one as Pete's electronic attacks overwhelmed their systems. The Zephyrians had built their technology to resist physical attacks, but they had not prepared for the sophisticated cyber warfare that humans could unleash. The battle for Keth Prime lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Zephyrian military base was destroyed and the planet was under human control. Steve's squadron had not lost a single ship, but the victory at Keth Prime was just the beginning. Admiral Carter had launched simultaneous attacks on 12 Zephyrian worlds. Human forces struck with speed and precision that left the enemy commanders stunned and confused. On the industrial world of Vex Station, Marine Colonel Janet Stone led a ground assault against a Zephyrian weapons factory. Her soldiers moved through the facility like trained killers, using tactics that had been developed in the ancient wars on Earth. The Zephyrians were excellent individual fighters, but they were not prepared for the coordinated team attacks that the humans used. Janet's Marines worked together like parts of a single machine, covering each other and striking from multiple directions at once. "Secure the computer systems," Janet ordered her technical specialist. "I want to know everything about their weapon production." The captured Zephyrian data revealed something important. The aliens had been enslaving other species to work in their factories and mines. Thousands of beings from dozens of different worlds were being held as prisoners. "Free all the prisoners," Janet commanded, "and ask them if they want to help. Use fight." Many of the freed aliens joined the human cause immediately. They had been waiting for someone strong enough to stand up to the Zephyrian Empire. The humans were not just fighting for themselves anymore. They were leading a rebellion against tyranny. The war spread across dozens of star systems. Human forces seemed to be everywhere at once, striking at Zephyrian supply lines and communication centers. The aliens had never faced an enemy that could coordinate attacks across such vast distances. Captain Walsh was promoted to Commodore and given command of a larger fleet. His force included ships from 6 different human worlds and crews from a dozen alien species that had joined the fight. The unity of purpose was something the Zephyrians could not understand. The Zephyrian High Council met in emergency session. On their home world, Ambassador Kethvar, who had called the humans weak farmers, was now demanding reinforcements to stop the human advance. "They are not fighting like we expected," he admitted to the council. "They use strange tactics and work together in ways we have never seen. Our individual warriors cannot match their coordinated attacks." Emperor Zeth Prime, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire, listened to the reports with growing anger. His forces were losing battles against an enemy they had dismissed as harmless. Entire worlds were falling to human fleets that appeared without warning and struck with devastating effectiveness. "How many ships do the humans have?" the Emperor demanded. "We don't know," Kethvar replied. "Every time we destroy one of their fleets, 2 more appear somewhere else. Their industrial capacity seems to be enormous." The truth was even worse than the Zephyrians realized. The human war machine was still growing. New ships were being built faster than old ones were being destroyed. The entire human civilization had become focused on one goal: destroying the empire that had murdered their children. Admiral Carter was planning his next move from his command center on Luna Station. Intelligence reports showed that the Zephyrians were pulling their forces back toward their home system. They were finally starting to understand the size of the threat they faced. "They're scared," Carter told his staff officers. Good. They should be. The final phase of the war was about to begin. Human forces were converging on Zephyr Prime, the heavily fortified capital world of the enemy empire. It would be the biggest battle in galactic history. Captain Walsh received his orders for the assault. His fleet would be part of the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Hundreds of ships from dozens of worlds, all united by this memory of New Haven and the determination to make sure it never happened again. "This is for all the children who died," Steve told his crew as they prepared for hyperspace jump. "This is for everyone who thought humans were too weak to fight." Back, the dragons were coming to Zephyr Prime, and they were bringing fire and fury beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The human fleet arrived at Zephyr Prime like a storm of metal and fire. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vengeance, and watched as hundreds of ships dropped out of hyperspace around the Zephyrian homeworld. It was the largest military force in human history. Captain Steve Walsh commanded a battle group of 30 ships on the fleet's right flank. His converted cargo vessel had been upgraded again and was now bristling with the most advanced weapons humanity could build. Behind him came supply ships, mobile repair yards, and troop transports filled with Marines ready for ground combat. The Zephyrian defenses around their homeworld were massive. Orbital battle stations, missile platforms, and fighter squadrons surrounded the planet like a deadly shield. Emperor Zeth Prime had called back every available ship to defend the capital. It should have been impossible for any enemy to break through. But the humans did not attack like any enemy the Zephyrians had ever faced. "All ships begin electronic warfare operations," Admiral Carter commanded. The battle started before a single shot was fired. Human ships began jamming Zephyrian communications and disrupting their sensor networks. The aliens found their own defenses turning against them as computer viruses spread through their systems. Lieutenant Commander Pete Morris was coordinating the cyber attacks from 12 different ships. His team of programmers and engineers had spent months studying captured Zephyrian technology. They knew exactly how to make the enemy's weapons stop working. "Their orbital platforms are going offline," Pete reported to Admiral Carter. "We have control of their defensive grid." The Admiral smiled grimly. The Zephyrians had built their defenses to stop enemy ships, not to protect against enemies who could turn their own weapons against them. "Begin the assault," Carter ordered. The human fleet moved forward in perfect coordination. Each ship knew exactly where to go and what to do. There was no confusion, no hesitation, no wasted effort. It was like watching a deadly dance performed by hundreds of partners who had practiced together for years. Captain Walsh led his battle group against the enemy's left flank. The Zephyrian ships tried to fight back, but their communications were jammed and their weapons were malfunctioning. They found themselves fighting alone against coordinated human attacks. "Target their command ship," Steve ordered his weapons officer. "Take out their leaders first." The Zephyrian flagship tried to escape, but it was surrounded by human vessels. Plasma bolts and missiles struck it from 6 different directions at once. The crystal armor that had protected Zephyrian ships for centuries cracked and shattered under the concentrated firepower. Commander Vex Thole, the architect of the new Haven massacre, was on a heavy cruiser trying to organize a counterattack. He watched in horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed around him. The humans were not just winning. They were demonstrating complete superiority in every aspect of warfare. How are they doing this? Vex Thole demanded of his officers. "We are the greatest warriors in the galaxy." But his officers had no answers. Their individual fighting skills meant nothing against an enemy that fought as a single unified force. The humans moved like parts of a vast machine, each piece supporting the others in ways the Zephyrians could not understand or counter. The space battle lasted 3 days. Human forces slowly tightened their grip around Zephyr Prime, destroying defensive platforms and enemy ships with methodical precision. When Zephyrian reinforcements arrived from other systems, they found themselves trapped and outnumbered. On the second day, Marine Colonel Janet Stone led the assault on the planet's surface. Her forces included human marines, freed alien slaves, and volunteers from a dozen species that had suffered under Zephyrian rule. They were united by a common hatred of the Empire that had enslaved and murdered so many. The Zephyrian ground forces were brave and well-equipped, but they could not match the tactical superiority of their enemies. Janet's Marines used combined arms tactics, air support, and electronic warfare to overwhelm every defensive position. "Secure the government complex," Janet ordered her troops. "I want the Emperor and his council captured alive." The fighting in the capital city was fierce, but brief. Zephyrian warriors who had never known defeat found themselves outmaneuvered and surrounded by enemies who seemed to anticipate their every move. The Crystal Palace that had stood for 1,000 years fell in 6 hours. Emperor Zeth Prime was captured in his throne room, along with most of his high council. The proud ruler who had commanded an empire of 100 worlds now knelt in chains before alien soldiers he had considered inferior. Admiral Carter came down to the planet to accept the surrender personally. He found Commander Vex Thole in a military prison, surrounded by the wreckage of his career and his civilization. "You wanted to know what humans are really like, Carter?" told the defeated Zephyrian. "Now, you know." Vex Thole looked up at the human admiral with eyes full of fear and confusion. "Your people seem so weak," he whispered. "You were farmers and traders. How did you become so terrible?" Carter sat down across from his prisoner. "We were farmers and traders because we chose to be," he explained. "But we became farmers and traders only after we spent 10,000 years learning how to kill each other. We got very good at it." The Admiral's voice was quiet but cold. "Every human child learns about the ancient wars on Earth. Millions of soldiers fighting with weapons that could destroy entire cities. We built our peaceful colonies because we wanted to leave that behind." Vex Thole began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "You were not weak," he said slowly. "You were just sleeping." "That's right," Carter replied. "And you woke us up by murdering our children. That was the worst mistake your species ever made." The war ended with the unconditional surrender of the Zephyrian Empire. The peace terms were harsh, but not genocidal. The aliens would pay reparations to the families of their victims, disarm their military, and accept human oversight of their government for 50 years. Most importantly, they would acknowledge the massacre of civilians as a war crime and promise never to target non-combatants again. The galaxy would remember what happened when someone tried to fight humans by killing their families. 1 year later, Jake Miller stood at the New Haven Memorial. The site of the destroyed colony had been turned into a place of remembrance, with 50,000 names carved into black stone. Each name represented a person who had died simply because they lived in peace. Jake was now the Colonial Reconstruction Administrator. His job was to help rebuild the worlds that had been damaged in the war. His own children, Kate and Tom, had survived the attack and were now living on Earth with their grandparents. They came in peace, lived in peace, and died protecting each other. Jake read from the memorial inscription. Their sacrifice awakened the strength we hope never to need again. The memorial was visited by beings from across the galaxy. Other alien civilizations had watched the war with amazement and fear. They had seen what happened when someone underestimated humanity's capacity for organized violence. Admiral Carter, now retired again, often came to the memorial to think about the war and its lessons. The human military remained strong, but the colonies were returning to their peaceful ways. The dragons had gone back to sleep, but everyone knew they could be awakened again if necessary. The galaxy was different now. Trade routes were safer, slavery was being abolished on dozens of worlds, and smaller species no longer lived in fear of stronger empires. The Zephyrian War had taught everyone an important lesson about the sleeping dragons of humanity. They looked like peaceful farmers and traders, but underneath that gentle exterior was a species that had survived and conquered the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. Earth had taught its children how to fight, and those lessons could never be unlearned. The dragons slept peacefully among the stars, dreaming of better days. But they would always be ready to wake up if someone was foolish enough to threaten their families again.